What is going on, guys? This is Miasin. So I don't know if you've watched or even remembered the Fire King Snake Eye deck profile that I uploaded when I topped YCS Rio a few weeks ago. But basically, I mentioned in my video that the worst cards in my deck list were board breakers. Shockingly enough, because, you know, the theory behind them, not too bad. But in practice, things are often different from theory. I mentioned also that if these cards, if the board breakers that I played were hand traps instead, I would have performed much better because every single time I had like a board breaker, I was like, you know what, if this was a Veiler going second, it would have been like so much better than having to wait until my turn and then having to, you know, get to use it. You know, I just want cards to be, you know, live as early as possible. And I never really explained my thought process behind that and also my experience, but now I feel like this video is perfect for that. So today I'll let you guys know how I feel about hand traps and board breakers in the current format and which ones do I recommend over the other, especially if you're playing like the Fire deck, you know, Snake Eye, etc. But also if you're playing the other decks, because they all kind of follow a similar pattern. I mean, some decks are an exception, like the Despia deck, for example, not really trying to play hand traps. I don't really think that deck has the luxury of being able to do that, but it can play certain board breakers like Triple Tactic Thrust and Fusion Duplication. And some other decks, I mean, yeah, board breakers in those decks would make kind of no sense, like Labyrinth, for example. You might as well play hand traps, although some board breakers might maybe make sense, but I don't know. But yeah, anyways, before we proceed, friendly reminder, of course, to smash the like and subscribe button. Really motivates me a lot to keep making videos like these. And with that being said, let's get right into it. I've got the 10 most played hand traps as well as 10 of the most played board breakers in a way, kind of. Not really, maybe not in order because nobody's playing Ultimate Slayer at the moment. Maybe like the top 10 best decks right now. Alright, so first of all, when we look at a card like Ashe, you know, this card is super generic, right? To the point where almost every deck wants to play it because it's not necessarily super powerful, but it's good against everyone. Like, it's decent against the Snake Eye deck, even though people say, oh, it's a fire monster, don't play it, it plays into Hita. It doesn't matter. The card is good enough to, you know, still warrant like being played in your deck, even though it's a fire. That's a non-argument. Against the Voice's Voice, okay, sure, it's not that great, but to be fair, every single hand trap against that deck is a gamble anyways. They either have, you know, the out to it or they don't. Sometimes their hand plays through 0 hand traps, or sometimes they play through 5 hand traps. Because they can just go activate Ritual Spell, summon Skull Guardian, you negate that, sure, they hard drew the Novox anyways, normal effect, nothing matters. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, negate that, sure, but they still have their negate for next turn. So yeah, it doesn't really change all that much. And then against, obviously, the Despia deck, Ashe's game. Ashe against, like, anything that plays either the pure Melodious deck or anything that plays the Melodious engine, Ashe is extremely hit or miss. Because Ostinato is the main card that you're trying to Ashe, obviously. And they always have to start with it, so it's not really like there is a specific choke point. It's not like you can Ashe the Baka either, the fusion monster that summons from the deck, because you can't negate any of the activated effects of the Melodious fusion monsters while Baka's on the field. So you can Veiler, Imperm, and Mourner Baka, but you can't Ashe it. So holding your Ashe for too long, usually not the greatest, because otherwise you're going to let your opponent go into an Appaloosa pretty much under like your Ashe still, and there's pretty much no timing for you to Ashe them. So you might as well gamble and Ashe the Ostinato. If they have a second Ostinato, it is what it is, because the card is not once per turn. Great card design, by the way, Konami. You just have to Ashe Ostinato and pray to God, honestly. There's really nothing else. Ashe against Stunned by Dragon, you know, not too bad as well. And then Ashe, well, I mean, you can use, like, you can Ashe, like, generic cards, or you can hold it for their Kaimen on battle phase. Usually, that's the correct play. You know, another deck that doesn't really have any specific choke points, because if they hard draw, like, the Chundra, then there is no, they don't need Kaimen anyways. They're just gonna special summon it, or what are you gonna do? Like, Ashe the field spell? Sure, well, then they're gonna Kaimen you. So it's again like a kind of like a hit or miss, just like the Ostinato in the Melodious package. Ashe against Labyrinth is very similar to Ashe against Despia. It is remarkable. It Ashes their 2 main cards, so unless they have like transaction rollback to recover from it, it usually hurts a lot. Ashe against Purely, not the best, but at least it plays around, you know, their field spell, not allowing you to target their monster, so that's also fine. But you do have to know how their deck operates, because if you hold your Ashe for too long and they go Pure Lily, search the trap card, and then activate effect, get like the spell underneath, and then summon an Xyz and then set the trap, and you still have your Ashe in your hand, you are going to be looking like a big fool. And yeah, Ashe against Runic Stun, always playable. You Ashe the Fountain, you Ashe like all of their like pot cards or card of Demise and stuff like that. That's pretty nice. Ashe against Kashtira, you can gamble and Ashe the Prosperity or Ashe the Field Spell. And then Ash against Flunderies is pretty much like Veiler and Imperm because you can Ash like the Robina, but then it is still utilizable under Shifter, so that's what I like a lot, unlike Veiler and especially Mourner, which is dead. For the Board Breakers, because I just proved a point about Ash, you know, it's pretty good against every single one of these cards. Are Board Breakers really that good against these decks? Well, first of all, if let's say instead of having an Ash, you had like a triple tactic talent against like the Snake Eye deck, then your opponent generates like 5 interruptions with one single card, and all you have is talent, which doesn't really stop anything. Obviously, you have to have like a good hand on top of having talent. Whereas if you have Ash and a weak hand, at least you can kind of grind it out. Even if, you know, the situation is a little dire, your opponent goes like Diabell Star Pitch, like a real card, and then goes like effect, and then get original, and then you Ash it. You get to survive a little bit, which is, you know, it's fine. But if you have like talent and a weak hand, you know for a fact that you've lost. That is an issue that I had a lot. In my tournament experience, I had like multiple talents multiple times. Like I drew the 2 copies of triple tactic talents like 4 times almost the YCS. Almost every single time I had to go talent, draw 2, which is the worst thing about talent, especially when you draw 2, because that's pretty much like desires into desires. So you're really just recovering the cards that you lost, because you're using 1 card to get 2 cards, but you have another dead card in your hand, so you're really just back to square one. And again, this could have been a hand shop, so instead of facing a gigantic board, I'm only really facing like a small board at most really, or almost practically nothing. So yeah, keep that in mind. If you want to play a card like triple tactic talent, you're just not allowed to brick, so that's another issue. But sometimes it is fine because your opponent's deck doesn't really make a gigantic board. For example, Voices Voice, their end board isn't like an FTK. It's kind of manageable. It's not like the fire decks where that just makes so many interruptions that one single talent just doesn't do anything. Whereas, you know, hand shops, you can at least like hope to God that they don't have the extender if you time it well. If you have talent against Voices Voice, they pretty much always have to play into it, so that's nice. If you have talent against Despia, just scoop up the game right now because it is useless. They're gonna use all their stuff on draw phase and standby phase, so that's really bad. And then they don't have to use any monster effects after that if they go for the Gimmick Puppet combo, so that's also terrible. Against Melodious, one single Ostinado achieves way too much, so I wouldn't really rely on triple tactic talents there. If you're going first against Standby Dragon that makes you go first and tries to OTK you, and you got talents, well, sure, you can use talents when you get a hand shop to look at their hand. That's actually not too bad. But if they have like Board Breakers instead, then they can backfire. But to be fair, it's usually not going to be an issue because you're going first against Standby Dragon. So this is where talent is not a Board Breaker, but rather like a Call by the Grave S cards. And I actually think this is one of the better applications for talent, is when you're going first. Going second, I actually think the card is worse this format. Against Labyrinth, I mean, talent is just like the kind of card that you only have in your deck because there's pretty much nothing else in your side deck. That's usually the issue with trap decks. You play cards that are like the least garbage against them because there's not like that many outs to trap decks. Like realistically, like Cosmic is like it's fine, but then like what else do you have? Like if you have like droplets and stuff like that against Labyrinth, it's pretty bad. Nibiru you always have to take out, Droll you always have to take out, etc. Like you're always gonna end up with like a lot of cards to like fill up both sides, and usually talent is one of them, and you're like, okay, might as well. If they have like if they use like a furniture on the main phase, then I can Ash, at least if you're going like second, or if they have a hand shop like Ash, Veiler, etc., like Nibiru, and then at least Nibiru, talent can be used, but otherwise it's pretty bad. And then against Purely, I mean, they don't really have to play into it. They use a lot of effects on standby phase, another issue. And then Runic Stun, talent is 100% unplayable. It does absolutely nothing. They only use Yugen on draw phase and standby phase, and either way, it's only on their turn, and they don't play hand shop, so talent is catastrophic. Against Kashtira, it's not too bad, but you do have to play into their board, and you will be losing a lot of cards by the time talent is live, because again, their first effect is Shangri-La on the standby phase. If they go into that, and then you have to play into like the Fenrir banishing a card, they can play around your talent very well, so that's also just mediocre. And against Flunderies, they don't play hand shops, so if you have talent going first, it's dead. Talent is just not good enough. You might as well just rely on Ash, Imper, and Veiler, but if you have like nothing else, you might as well like replace your Droll, your Nibiru and Mourner for talent, and keep the Droll and Ghost Ogre if you had them already. Thrust is just not a generic board breaker because it's pretty bad going first unless you're playing like Unchained or Despia for Fusion Duplication. I'll re-mention that, so I'm not really gonna go into detail with that one, but it's usually not the best. Forbidden Droplet is the other board breaker that I played actually at the YCS. So I played 3 Droplet, 3 Talent, 3 Ash, 3 Imperm, as well as 3 Ogre. Shoutouts to Hani. This was the worst configuration of hand shops and board breakers I could have played. Even though Forbidden Droplet, I still will keep repeating that to this day. It is a great card going second, but if you main deck this card and you draw it going first, it's always worse than Imperm and Veiler. Always, every single time, because it's pretty much like these cards, but you have to waste 1 card in order to use them. And if you get a hand trap to death, you are on a very low card count when you're going first. So that's what you have to take into account. And also, this card can still lose to Dust or Lightning Storm, whereas Valor doesn't. Imperm does, sure, but whatever. I mean, it's inevitable. It's a back row, so at least there's that. And going second, this card is still really good. I mean, Droplet can be great against the Fireboard going second. Also, if you have other board breakers, it's gonna be even better. Against Voice's Voice, it's fantastic. Against Despia, you can protect yourself from the Gimmick Puppet lock, so it's great. Against Melodious, you negate Appaloosa and Vortex and other stuff like that. Or like the Flowering Etoile, it doesn't target, so that's really the beauty of Forbidden Droplet and the reason why people love it so much. Okay, against Standby Dragon, it's pretty bad, but you can still use it on the battle phase and damage step to protect yourself to a certain extent. Against Labyrinth, I already mentioned that it's not the best. Against Purely, they can play around it by chaining the trap card to your Droplet. And then they can chain Expurely Noir to like keep spinning your cards. So yeah, it's just not ideal. Again, even considering the fact that they are no longer unaffected by card effects, right? Because they have to detach two materials, so you're gonna chain Droplet to their Expurely Noir. Once they do that, they can still answer Droplet indirectly with the Purely Yip in the grave. So that's what I really don't like. Against Runic Stun, Droplet is just, it does nothing. Like, it can still be used against, like, Hugin, because you can sacrifice your own monster to beat Skill Drain, so it's kind of an option. All of them are just garbage against Runic Stun. Board Breakers are just typically really bad or really good. Lightning Storm is meh, because it trades with one Runic card. They just go into Hugin and protect themselves. Duster, same thing. And then Cosmic, either they had like the Munin before, but then they play into Dust or Lightning Storm, or it banishes the Runic Fountain, and it does hurt. And finally, Droplet against Kashtira and Flunderies, not too bad, honestly, pretty good. So that's the reason why I said, you know, Droplet is still a card to consider. To be fair though, Droplet going first against Kashtira is really bad. If they go straight for Unicorn and you Droplet them, that is a worse Imperm again, and you have to use it super early, so Ash is typically just a little better, depending on the situation. But the best board breakers to play, if you want to play them, are Droplet and Talent. These are just like the better cards going second generically, but Talent is, for me at least, more of a going first card. And yeah, cards like Enemy Controller, Book of Eclipse, they all belong to the same category of cards that you really want to play, especially because you can dodge Valor, Imperm, and stuff like that. Same thing with the Droplet, of course. So going second, these cards are just even better. You go like normal summon Snake Eye Ash, and then your opponent goes Imperm, and then you go chain Book of Eclipse. So your Snake Eye Ash still resolves, and you're booking everything in one shot. These cards, again, going first, not super ideal, but actually not garbage. Enemy Controller going first, I want to say is better than Droplet going first. Stealing a monster is typically better than negating a monster effect. Like, bodies are relevant. They won't be able to link summon, so you can take their normal summon, and if they don't have anything else, like against Voice's Voice, if you time it well on like their Novox, then they won't be able to ritual summon if they don't have it anymore, so that's not too bad. If you've got like Book of Eclipse, sometimes you might as well just hold it in your hand and then use it for next turn, so, against like the decks that don't OTK you at least. And then moving forward, every single board breaker is just not good enough to main deck. Ultimate Slayer is pretty awful. It's a card that's really niche. It's only good when you have like a super loose extra deck and you know exactly what you're using it against, otherwise it just doesn't do anything. And then Metal Tronios is a great card, but it's only good in tier 0 format because it's only playable like if you got like the card that matches all the characteristics of the card that you're trying to counter. So it's good in mirror matches, but that's about it. Otherwise this card just does nothing, so you can't main deck a card like Metal Tronios. You can side deck it. This whole video is all about, you know, hand traps versus board breakers in the main deck, not in, you know, in the side deck, because board breakers will always have a place to exist in the side deck. And then finally for Lightning Storm, Regeki, and Duster, if you main deck these cards and you are forced to go first, these are just less cards in your hand, really. Same thing with Ultimate Slayer. Normal spell cards, they all have the same issue, except for Talent and Thrust, because they're normal spell cards, they can still be used going first, while still obviously being good cards going second overall. And then for the hand traps, I mean, these cards, it doesn't matter if you're going first or second. Ash, Imperm, Valor, Mourner, Nibiru, Joel, Ogre, Bestials, Ghost Bell, and DD Crow, you can't get outplayed by your opponent randomly saying, okay, you go first on game 3. No, it doesn't matter because these cards are always going to be live. Again, except if your Imperm gets dustered. So that's a reason why sometimes when I side deck for game 2 and game 3 and I'm going first, I actually remove some of my my Imperms, because I'm assuming that my opponent is going to be siding in Lightning Storms and Dusters, so there's just going to be like less cards for me that I can use to interact with my opponent. But if I am playing Crossout Designator, I'm always going to keep that one Imperm. And you can do the same thing with like a bunch of hand traps, just decrease their card count so that you still play them. You can still counter them with Crossout, but it's just that you're not going to be drawing duplicates and stuff, because when you're going first, the strategy is completely different than if you're just on game 1 and you don't know if you're going first or second, and you really just need to like hit something very specifically going second most of the time. So what I'm really trying to say here is that hand traps are pretty much always good, right? They're just always reliable, and you know that they're always going to be doing something. Whereas board breakers, they're good sometimes, but not all the time. They're just not reliable at all. Sometimes they're insane going first, or sometimes they do nothing. Like you got talent and you're going first against Despia. Great, that's a -1 for you. Same thing with crossout. Or you're going second. I mean, talent is just always like awful against Despia. But you're going second with talent against a fire deck, and you just really wish it was a hand trap instead. I still have PTSD from all of that, because if I played more freaking hand traps instead, it would have been so much freaking better. Like, hand traps are just... they make you feel safe. They make you feel like you don't have to necessarily draw the absolute nuts, play completely perfectly. And the biggest point that I haven't mentioned yet is when you play hand traps, you're also beating your opponent's non-engine, because you're hand trapping your opponent to death to the point where he's gonna make a half board like SP pass or nothing at all pass and have a bunch of hand traps in hand. And you can grind with that if you're going second, because your game plan becomes different. Like now, if you can summon just something like an SP Little Knight, you can grind it out and play through multiple hand traps, even though you're not trying to full combo, because going second, you can start applying pressure in different ways. Like, you can start using the Charmer monsters to, like, steal your opponent's monsters. You have Battle Phase that gives you access to, like, a bunch of different things. You can go into Zeus, Typhon, etc. Whereas going first, that's not a thing, so you're always playing into hand traps way more. So again, if you're playing a hand traps yourself, you're also going to be feeling much safer when your opponent has a bunch of hand traps and full combo, right? Whereas when you have board breakers instead, if your opponent has like a 1-card combo and 4 non-engine, you lose the game on the spot, because now you're facing like 11 interruptions, which is completely impossible to manage even if you got like 2 different board breakers. And you've heard this before, but hand traps are typically only good in combination. Like if you only have like 1 hand trap, it's usually bad. If you got like 1 Nibiru, it's catastrophic, because even 1-card combos, they play around Nibiru, and almost every single deck here does not lose to Nibiru at all. They all counter Nibiru. Like, Melodious beats Nibiru, Despia summons 4 times, Tenpai Dragon summons on the battle phase, Labyrinth just doesn't lose to Nibiru at all, unless they go for the Unchained combo. And then Purely absolutely does not lose to Nibiru. The Runic Den, bro, it summons 1 time. And Kashtira, I mean, Greed can make them lose to Nibiru, but usually it's not too bad. And Flunderies, I mean, they have to summon like double Empen to lose to Nibiru. So it's just another card that if you only have that, it's pretty bad. But if you got like only 1 board breaker, it's also just as bad. While you're at it, you might as well play the cards that have a higher likelihood of being good in combination. So for example, if you got like 2 Veiler, it's pretty good. If you got like 2 Book of Eclipse, it's a little less good. Or like 2 board breakers that are just like identical, because most board breakers are once per turn. If you got like double Talent, that's again the issue that I mentioned before, where you have to like draw 2 cards just to compensate, and then you're just back to basically having nothing at all. Whereas if you had like double Veiler, you just stop your opponent and stop your opponent's extender, which is insane. Same thing with double Imperm. It feels just so much safer. And also when you play board breakers, you play into anti-spell, which is just a 1-of, but better believe you're gonna be seeing that 1-of like it's a 7-of. This is Yu-Gi-Oh for you. Anyways, I think I'm done ranting on how I despise board breakers. I just think they're not in a good position right now to main deck, at least, because they have a very low likelihood of carrying you, especially if you don't play like a huge amount, or if your deck has consistency issues. Like if your deck breaks like 7% of the time, that's already too much. No. You gotta be consistent like 99% of the time, which is impossible. The most consistent deck in Yu-Gi-Oh is like Post-Infinite Forbidden Gimmick Puppet, and even that deck can break. Even then, I would still not consider playing like a bunch of board breakers in the deck, unless you're playing, again, like certain weird decks like Despia. They can get away with board breakers and not hand traps, just because the deck is different. The deck has a lot of gas, so when you look at your hand, sometimes you have like 0 non-engine and you still break boards. Whereas a deck like Fire, like Snake Eye, Fire King, etc., if you don't have hand traps, you're usually always losing in the mirror match every single time, unless your opponent misplays. That's another history for another day. Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts about hand traps and board breakers in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.